Hi, I'm Peter Friend. Can you imagine if a kid asked for a pet at Christmas that was a bit different? That's what this poem is about. My Christmas pet. I didn't want a goldfish and I didn't want a cat. A mouse was just too thin, I thought, a guinea pig too fat. A dog was sort of ordinary, a frog was quite absurd. And so I asked my parents for a large and flightless bird. I don't know how they did it, but when Christmas came around, I woke up in the morning to a sort of pecking sound. And rushing to the living room, I saw beside the tree an ostrich wrapped in paper with a card addressed to me. I shouted out in pleasure and undid the bird with glee and introduced myself at once as he looked down at me. At 6'1", I realised then, the bird was rather tall, and I, at only half his size, was relatively small. But still, an ostrich, how was that? I telephoned my friends, and in they trooped and stared and said, well, hey, it all depends on what you're going to do with him. You see, now he is here. I hadn't really thought of that. It wasn't all that clear. Well, soon my ostrich made me see the question wouldn't be what I would do with him, but rather what he'd do with me. I guess my ostrich didn't know that I was now the boss, and as my friends all pointed out, he looked a little cross. He flapped his wings and scratched and stomped his feet upon the floor. My friends began to think they'd leave and edge towards the door. And then, before we knew it, sort of sudden, in a flash, my ostrich had surveyed the room and made a mighty dash. Around the room he sped, and everything that stood was scattered back and forth, and we escaped as best we could to hide behind the furniture or underneath the tree, until I thought, this must be stopped, and now it's up to me. The room was all a mess, you see, the Christmas tree a wreck. The silver baubles off the tree were wrapped around his neck. The coloured lights were flashing still, but wound about his head. And so I marched right up to him, and this is what I said. I'm sorry if you're out of sorts. I'm sorry if you feel that leaving the savannah was a terrible ordeal. But let me quite assure you, having left all that behind, this neighbourhood is better, as I'm sure that you will find. The African savannah is a dangerous place, you see, but living here is easy if you settle down with me. You'll always have enough to eat, and if you make amends, I'm sure you'll always find you'll have a lot of lovely friends. He looked a little awkward then and shifted on his toes, as if he knew that he had behaved quite poorly, I suppose. And then I smiled and winked at him, and he winked back at me, as if to say, I'm sure you're right, I'll wait around and see. I didn't want to wait at all, for this was Christmas Day. I leapt upon his back at once and shouted out, hooray! And off we raced, my pet and I, and headed out the door. And all my friends ran after us and gave a mighty roar. And down the street we raced and shouted, join the Christmas dance. Our neighbours tumbled out of doors to watch the ostrich prance. And he was just as proud as Punch, a flash of white and black. And I was prouder still, I'm sure, up there upon his back. You see, I didn't want a goldfish, and I didn't want a cat. A mouse was just too thin, I thought, a guinea pig too fat. A dog was sort of ordinary, a frog was quite absurd. And life was more exciting with a large and flightless bird.